And we're now going to talk with Dirk Becker from Compassion Farm about the issue. We're going to stay away from the he said, she said, and the politics, and try to talk about urban farming and gardening. Dirk, I want to start out. I know a bit of history. Oh, he's brought some veggies.
There you go.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. You moved into the property on Fernmar Road when?
12 years ago.
12 years ago. You started a garden in the backyard?
Yes.
Innocent enough, everybody does.
Innocuous, yes.
It grew, it grew, it grew.
Yes, it expanded.
Those bylaws have been in place since you began doing what you're doing.
Oh, they began 06, right.
When the town was
came in 06,
okay.
But we started in 99.
Why should the rules not apply to you?
I think the rules should apply if they make sense. And so there's
sense to you, in your opinion?
Well, I'm suggesting that we need rules that are for the betterment of all Vancouver Islanders. As you well know, that less than 5% of our food is grown in Vancouver Island. We only have 2 days fresh food supply, and the average farm in Canada is over the age of 55. 75% of farmers are going to retire in the next 15 years. 85% of farmers have a job off-site to make ends meet. So if we only have 2 days fresh food supply in Vancouver Island, it would make sense that all of us would work together, including you and I and all our leaders, to find ways to be more self-sufficient on Vancouver Island.
And why do you have to do that on a property in Lanceville on Fernmar Road and not somewhere else? Why?
The vast majority of urban farming in the world, not just on Vancouver Island, is done in urban areas, which is why it's called urban farming. And the reason for that is, as people have migrated from other places, especially Toronto and Ontario, as it were, and other places in Canada, and moved to Vancouver Island, it has driven up the property values. And so now the average person who's wanting to buy a house and a piece of land and farm can't, because they are estate properties that are in the millions of dollars. So we were able to buy our property as a gravel pit that someone had scraped all the soil off for only $185,000. And so the average person who wants to farm, the #1 barrier to farming in British Columbia for young farmers is availability of affordable land. So people are farming on smaller and smaller pieces, and so urban farming makes lots of sense that way.
I'm going to draw a parallel or a distinction between gardening for yourself and what your family needs to have on the kitchen table and having the right to do that.
Right.
You guys are operating a farmer's market, therefore it's an agricultural business on your property. I understand that, and I understand that that's the link to trying to make Vancouver Island food supply more sustainable. Right. There's other ways to do that. There's spin farming. There's this has become about more than just growing food for yourself.
And spin farming, in essence, is small plot intensive. You are practicing agriculture.
There's lots of empty lots sitting around that you could plant on.
And there are people spin farming right now in Nanaimo and places like Victoria and Vancouver. So that is also practicing agriculture. Urban farming within urban areas. All urban farming is done in urban and peri-urban areas, and spin farming is another example of that. Spin farming isn't done out in the country, it's done in cities, within cities. And we have spin farmers currently operating in Nanaimo and places like Vancouver that supply the farmers markets. It completely makes sense because we are now at peak oil, peak water, peak phosphorus, and peak soil. And so it makes sense that we would relocalize and we would bring town and country back together and move away from the model of suburbs and commuting to work, to relocalizing our economy and be closer to where we work and we play.
Okay, I was going to know to turn my chair to the right. So is that my right or TV right?
This way.
I think I'll go this
that way. TV right?
Turn my chair to the right.
Oh, you're getting some help here.
I'm going to actually just stand up. Sorry, Dirk. Okay. Now,
all right.
I'm going to fast forward things a little bit more because time flies, as we just experienced.
And we're having fun.
Yes. If the objective is to produce and make locally grown food more available to a larger part of the population, do you think that you can be effective in the position that you're in? You're very close to the issue. There's a lot, I'm not going to get, there's a lot of animosity, a lot of conflict between the district and yourself, and things that have been transpired between the two of you. What is the best way to get results that everybody's happy with?
Is to broaden the conversation, and we've certainly done that because we have thousands of supporters. A Facebook group formed, as an example, 400 people in 4 days. It's at 1,600 now. We have a group formed in Lanceville called Friends of Urban Agriculture in Lanceville, so Lanceville-specific group that meets every single week. 2 different people are making documentaries on us. We are now have been asked to write a book. I've also been asked to travel across Canada this fall when we have time. And so what Nicole and I are doing has really broadened the conversation conversation of the almost crisis we are in Canada. Even our current provincial government says that we need another 90,000 hectares in production in order to be self-sufficient. That's 222,000 acres. So you can see we're far from self-sufficiency because 95% of our food is imported onto Vancouver Island. So all we need to have is some kind of crisis with the ferries or some other happenstance or an earthquake or losing a ferry terminal, and suddenly within 2 days there'll be no fresh food in the grocery store. So it just seems, it makes sense to me that we would, as leaders, all leaders would, rather than think in terms of electoral cycles or in terms of budgets right in front of them, kind of like the accounting principle, is think into the future. And so what Nicole and I are asking is for all of us to sit down and have this conversation and say, what kind of future do you want for your children and grandchildren? Do you want fresh food available locally for your children and grandchildren?
And what kind of compromises are you willing to make that happen?
Whatever compromises that the majority of citizens in Lanceville decide, because so far it's really been one neighbor and a number of councillors.
Okay, I can't say yes or no. I don't know if it has been one
we
or
know,
not,
so I can say that. And so we're happy to abide by whatever the majority of Lancevillites say, and a number of Lancevillites, most of which are not friends or people that we know, have gone door to door, and within a couple of days they garnered more than 200 signatures asking council to stop the legal action. So there's just one example, and they started on our street, and they got a 80 to 90% success rate, meaning for out of every 10 people doors they went to, 8 or 9 people signed and said, please immediately stop the legal action against Dirk and Nicole.
What do you say to the neighbor? He moved in to his property knowing that he was going to have a certain curb appeal. Whether that's beautiful to you or not is kind of irrelevant, because everybody is entitled to their own opinion. And to purchase and expect a certain surrounding. So what do you say to that?
Well, what I say to anyone who wants to in estate property is to say that times are changing, and we always need to weigh the needs of the many for the needs of the few. And so years ago it was completely appropriate to smoke. I remember my pediatrician when I was a little boy, him smoking a cigar. And so
in the office
in front of me as he was giving me a shot here. Right? And so times change, and so as we're realizing that times are changing, we need to change with them. So how we use our land is one of the ways, and so I say on the record that you will see in the near future that people who are growing food on their property, that those property values will go down, and estate properties that have been stripped of nature and just have a ride-on lawnmower driving around with a big long estate driveway, the property value relative to those will go down.
Food ones will go up.
So I actually would suggest that we're doing our next door neighbor and Lanceville a favor by using the land in a way that benefits many people.
Some people would say that this is about you fighting for your livelihood.
Absolutely not, because Nicole and I were very close approaching $100,000 a year. Now we're down to about $20,000 a year. So at 52 years of age, after many years of carpentry and building houses, I'm beating my body to death to make $20,000 a year. We're doing this because we think it's the right thing to do.
We've got a couple minutes left. I feel we sped up, we slowed down, feeling pretty good. You have legal action against you now.
Yes.
Are you willing to go to jail for this?
Absolutely, and we've hired a lawyer.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, if you're not willing to pay the ultimate price, like so many people in the world have gone up against machine gun bullets for what they believe, you would at least need to willing to suffer in some way, whether it's a fine or jail or being a social outcast. All the great leaders for thousands of years were all people who were willing to put their neck on the line.
So you're willing to go to jail before you're willing to move and do what you're doing in another property?
Absolutely. I mean, if the people of Lanceville say, we don't want you doing that there, we want you to leave Lanceville, Nicole and I are happy to leave. But if the people of Lanceville want us to continue, we are happy to continue holding the line, standing up to a council that is thinking about the past and not looking into the future. And so we've had to hire a lawyer because Nicole and I are exhausted. It's 11 months now that we've been fighting this.
Which is a short period of time. Bylaws take years.
Yeah, we were happy to get into a process that would take up to 3 years. But the constant harassment and the constant threats of legal action. Sorry?
Harassment?
Okay.
A little bit?
The legal action feels to us like harassment.
Okay.
And so we're exhausted. Right. I'm, near tears because our lives are completely enveloped with this constant pressure of this alleged infraction, as our lawyer calls it.
I just got a 1-minute cue. Do you think that interacting with the district, like where does the ALR fit in?
The ALR, Agricultural Land Reserve, is a provincial thing, and that's putting a piece of land and protecting it as farmland.
Because it seems like that's where the majority of the change should be happening.
Well, the ALR is a separate issue.
A separate issue.
A separate issue. What we need to move towards is we need to move away from growing food is something that you get permission and are allowed to do or get a permit for, and we need to move towards it being a right for any and every Canadian to grow food on their residential property, including for sale, and including on municipal land and provincial land and federal land. We all need to be growing more food. So if there's anyone willing to work this hard, let's encourage it.
You have 3 things to do to come into compliance within us before legal action takes the next step. Are you going to do these things?
We're willing to do them to some degree, yes.
Okay. Topic for another interview, perhaps. Will you come back another time?
Anytime, Kate. It's always great working with you to make Nanaimo a better place.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Again, time went very, very quickly. It's an issue that deserves, and of course, I'm sure will get more attention as the days go by. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens in Landsville. The world is watching. I follow the Facebook page. There are hundreds of people from all over the place putting their input in. There's an election coming up in November. That's going to be interesting. We didn't even talk about it with Colin or Dirk, but a committee has been struck to look at the process of rewriting the bylaw, maybe defining what agriculture actually is. That has stirred up controversy in itself. Perhaps we'll have Dirk and Colin back for another edition of the show.